Story 1. The statue. The dealer was effusive in his praise for the artwork. It was just so lifelike. He gushed. It wouldn't be cheap, he admitted, but it was well worth every penny the artist was asking for it. I knew the drill. Let the dealer do the talking. Don't ask about the price until you've seen the piece. Don led he down the gallery, his stubby legs practically dancing with excitement. He was very bad at hiding his emotions, and he smelt a potential sale in the offing. I'd asked him to join me and my poker buddies for our weekly game countless times, but he'd always politely decline. Perhaps I needed to work on my poker face as well. With a flourish befitting a maestro, he flung aside the cloth covering. I almost gasped. It was a masterpiece, a sculpture of a woman caught mid-scream, her features twisted in some unknowable agony, hands clawing at her face as she looked skyward for the hell that never came. Exquisite. It turned out that the price wasn't that steep after all. A common trick used by salesmen, as I found out later, make the customer think it's going to cost a bomb, and when he's pleasantly surprised that it isn't going to burn such a big hole in his pocket, after all, he's more likely to be willing to part with his money. But I would have paid more if that's what it'd have taken to have that plaster lady grace the corner of the living room just beside the telly. Vera would never again be able to watch her silly rom-coms in peace as expected. She kicked you. A big fuss when the movers hefted the life-size statue into place. But I would have none of it, and my smart, lovely girl, knowing which side her bread was buttered on, wisely let the mat slide after letting loose one last plaintive whine about how it even smelt funny. The guests couldn't stop talking about it, though, much to my delight, and I was happy to give full to the ailing woman for my handsome winnings from poker night, too. Poor old Bobby swore he folded his pocket aces to my kings only because he thought he saw the statue blink. That fateful night birthed the tradition of cup for luck, which saw my rather vulgar friends cupping their hands round a certain part of the lady's anatomy in order to invite luck into their hands. I didn't approve of course, but it wasn't like the statue was going to be worse for wear. Anyway, to my surprise, Don finally agreed to come down for one of our games one night. He had heard from me how well his golden girl was being received by all who saw her, and I thought he was probably going to try to take the chance to pull in a few potential clients, even if it meant losing a few $100 to the sharks a wall. Hiding him at the table, he whistled when he saw the statue, illuminated by a small set of spotlights I had purchased just for the sculpture. I swear, Dave, it looks even more realistic and when I last saw it, I roll my eyes. Save the pitch, buddy, I've already bought it. I know, he looked forlorn. Well, I did tell him that he could have a scab for hire. He soon cheered up, though, as soon as he was seated at the table. For once, it seemed that no one was even interested in the game. Who the hell is this artist? Man, do you have any of his other works? Does he do nudes? Trevor, of course, reveling in the attention. Don detailed the provenance of the art piece. Ignoring the romantic embellishments, the inveterate salesman couldn't resist adding the background seemed a rather unexciting one. The artist was one he had worked with from time to time, but never had he produced such an inspired work. Don's pudgy fac. He fell as the rowdy bunch grew bored of the story and returned to Texas Hold'em. He remained sullen throughout, folding most hands and constantly looking at his watch. The others just got more boisterous as the night progressed, as was the usual case. Poker nights at my place always include an open bar. Almost inevitably, tempers eventually flared. I have to admit that part of the reason I keep my friends so well hydrated is because I can never resist a little bit of drama, even if it means that some of my friends end the night with a new bruise or two, or more rarely a few missing teeth. But that night I got way more than I bargained for. It all began when Trevor and Bobby both showed the ace of spades. It was probably just two decks mixed up after all. Half-drunk men are hardly the most careful, but Trevor had lost a couple of $100 just a few rounds back thanks to Bobby's rather unexpected full house. So you can sort of guess what happened next. The two men were on the floor before I knew it, drunkenly grappling with each other as the chips and cards from the upset table rained down on us all like some surreal snowstorm. It was only when the two human rolling pins suddenly tumbled dangerously close to my precious new statue that I had the sense to react. It was far too late. A half-choked wail of despair escaped my throat as the woman's head met the marble floor with an almighty crash and broke off from the body. I was ready to strangle the two clumsy cretins with my bare hands. But all thoughts of vengeance evaporated when the stench hit me. It was an odor so putrid that the mere whiff of it was enough to expunge the contents of my stomach to the back of my throat. Worst of all was the pool of gunk that was fast spreading from the broken pieces of plaster. Trevor gave a terrified scream and, like a crazed crab, scrambled on all fours to back away from the dark liquid. Bobby took one look and promptly emptied the contents of his stomach on the floor. Dazed, I could only stare dumbly at the jagged white protrusion from the head of the statue as the screams around me numbed my ears. The rest of the night was a blur. Someone called the police. Someone even called for an ambulance. Can you believe that? I hope it wasn't me. Don called his lawyer. I spent the night holed up in some hotel as the crime scene investigators swarmed all over my beautiful apartment to gather every last fragment of the unfortunate plaster-encased woman. I never found out her name. All I know is that she was the ex-wife of the murderous sculptor, the one mercy that has been providing me some library story too. Divorce, close your eyes, imagine a voice taking over, and it's all you can hear, screaming, loud, high-pitched SCR. Eaming fills your conscience. It won't leave you alone ever, at night, at work, all the time. Can other people hear it? Or are you going crazy? You start to lose touch with reality. Nothing matters except the voice because it never leaves you, and it will never leave you. Your life is this voice. Normal doesn't exist anymore, and death, well, it starts to look better every day. THIS is what happened to Ray McNeil. He was normal, 40-something banker, living the American dream in the bayous of Louisiana. Boothville, to be exact, a small village in the southeastern corner of Pelican State. Population 854. Ray's life was normal, boring even. He woke up every morning in his beige-colored room to the sound of his elderly neighbor's rooster. He brewed coffee in his older-than-the-hills percolator and put on his only suit, the one with the tan leather elbow patches. He drove his 2006 Buick LaCrosse, bought with last year's Christmas bonus, to Regions Bank, where he worked as a teller. He stopped at the store every day on his way home to buy cream sodas for his two children. Mac and Ray Jr. Sandy McNeil had dinner on the tee. Able at 6:45 sharp, and Ray's day would repeat when he woke up. Then the voice came, slowly at first, but gradually. Ray describes being completely at the voice's mercy. First, he lost his job at the bank. Focusing on the numbers and accounts suddenly seemed inconsequential compared to the screaming in his mind. Then his personality changed. Ray and Sandy started fighting, but even the nagging voice of his wife couldn't drown out the insistent noise. The couple separated in May of 2014, and a divorce followed. Sandy cited irreconcilable differences. The kids went with Sandy, leaving I in a house too big for one lonely person. When investigative reporter Jason Bates for the Baton Rouge Times sat down with him on February 17th, he did not see the man who once prided himself on the simplistic beauty of his life. Instead, a man, haggard and hunched, answered the door when he knocked. The doorbell, which formerly played a merry tune, hung broken on the doorframe. His siding was cracked and faded. A neglected garden lined the front walk. Dressed in blue striped pajamas, Ray McNeil looked twice his age and as bad as the house. Maybe it was a product of the nights he had spent in jail a few weeks before for disorderly conduct and disturbing the peace, or the alienation he had faced from his former friends and neighbors. But Ray looked tired. His life, he now spends his days at home, screaming along with the voice, drinking to drown out the sound. He hasn't left his sanctuary in weeks or showered, as far as Jason could tell. In fact, Ray only ventures outside on every third Friday, when he drives an hour and a half to the Capitol to see his teenage children. This is his life now, eating Kraft mac and cheese in his bathrobe on the days he's actually lucid enough to eat, watching old Western reruns on the days he can focus on reality. Ray McNeil is a victim of something deadly and destructive, and yet not recognized by the public. We acknowledge Bigfoot and Nessie is a common conversational topic, but we refuse to believe the facts in front of us. This is Ray McNeil's story, and it Edius our ears. An interview with Ray McNeil, February 17th, 2015. Q. So Ray, please describe what you have been hearing for the past year. I hear screaming, a female's voice, like nails on a chalkboard. It's soulless, a voice from hell, and it won't leave me alone. Q. We know that this voice is the reason you are currently unemployed and the cause of your divorce, but can you elaborate on the effects this thing has had on your life? I lost my wife, my job, my kids. I have nothing. My friends have all abandoned me. The voice is the only thing that has stayed, and look at me. Who could blame them? Q. Now this is something I've been wondering, and I'm sure our readers will be curious as well. How often do you hear this voice? Is it all the time, or do you have the periods of silence? No, all the time, no sleep. I can't have conversations. Well, who would I have conversation with? That wasn't a joke. I can't eat. Most of the time, all I do is listen. You don't understand how awful it is. Q. As you can tell, I'm very interested in the specifics of the voice. So I was wondering if the voice has ever delivered a coherent message. Do you hear words, huh? On occasion, Jason. Like what, Ray? It always says, "Let me out, set me free." I don't know what it means. I would let it out of my mind if I could. Q. Whoa, easy. There, Mr. McNeil. Now, where do you think this voice originated from? And why you, Ray? Why has it targeted you? It is my family's curse. My ancestor, Silas McNeil, murdered his wife and children while they slept. I believe this is our penance. His spirit has been sent back to haunt us. My dad was crazy, killed himself when I was 3, and now it's happening to me. I'm going crazy, and nothing can stop it. Stop. Just stop, please. Q. Mr. McNeil, please. Just one more question. What message do you have for others out there that are hearing the same thing, Ray? People in our shoes, as far as we can tell. Ray never answered this question. At this point, he became hysterical, clutching his head and screaming. He then proceeded to destroy the lapel mic clip to his pajama top, and threw the glass of water he'd so kindly offered Jason against the wall. Suddenly, the battered state of the couch and coffee table were explained. The remaining mic that had been attached to the wall behind Ray recorded the struggle that ensued. Mr. McNeil, who had been rolling around in the floor, banging his shins into the table legs, stood up, red-faced. He lifted the Effendi NG table and, by the sounds of it, threw it at the wall. Investigators later found a dent in the wall that supports this. On this day, the voice claimed another victim. Jason Bates, 26, lost his life to a demonic phenomena also responsible for Ray's loss of sanity. Autopsy reports later confirm that Jason Bates died of blunt force trauma to the skull, likely from the smashed lamp later found. The scene. Ray McNeil is in police custody, awaiting trial at this time. We will continue to post updates on this site as the trial progresses. Tell us your thoughts in the comments section below. Do you think Ray should be granted his insanity plea? What do you think the voice is? And if you, too, are suffering from this same affliction, please seek help. We will end this violence and end the voice. Story 3, The Gift of Mercy. Message begins. We made a mistake. That is the simple, undeniable truth of the matter. However painful it might be, the flaw was not in our observatories, for those machines were as perfect as we could make, and they showed us only the unfiltered light of truth. The flaw was not in the predictor, for it is a device of pure, infallible logic, turning raw data into meaningful information, without the taint of emotion or bias. No, the flaw was within us, the orchestrators of this disaster, the sentients who thought themselves beyond such failings. We are responsible. It began a short while ago, as these things are measured. Less than YYDly ago, though I suspect our systems of measure will mean very little by the time anyone receives this transmission. We detected faint radio signals from a blossoming intelligence to 114 DLS outward from the galactic core as photons travel. At first crude and unstructured, these leaking broadcasts quickly grew in complexity and strength, as did the messages they carried. Through our observatories, He watched a world of strife and violence, populated by a barbaric race of show. RT-lived, fast-breeding vermin. They were brutal and uncultured things which stabbed and shot and burned each other with no regard for life or purpose. Even their concepts of art spoke of conflict and pain. They divided themselves according to some bizarre cultural patterns and set their every industry to cause of death. They terrified us, but we were older and wiser, and so very far away, so we did not fret. Then we watched them split the atom and breach the heavens within the breadth of one of their single short generations, and we began to worry when they began actively transmitting messages and greetings into space. We felt fear and horror. Their transmissions promised peace and camaraderie to any who were listening, but we had watched them for too long to buy into such transparent deceptions. They knew we were out here, and they were coming for us. The orchestrators consulted the predictor, and the output was dire. They would multiply and grow and flood out of their home system like some uncountable tide of devour worms, consuming all that lay in their path. It might take 60 dealers, but they would destroy us if left unchecked with aching carapaces. We decided to act and sealed our fate. The gift of mercy was YY strides long with a mouth to quarters that in diameter, filled with many 40 for weights of machinery, fuel, and ballast. It would push itself up to 2.8 of light speed with its onboard fuel, and then began to consume interstellar primary element to halves to feed its unlimited acceleration. It would be traveling at nearly light speed. When it hit, they would never see it coming. Its launch was a day of mourning, celebration, and reflection. The horror of the act we had committed weighed heavily upon us all. The necessity of our crime did little to comfort us. The gift had barely cleared the outer cometary halo, and the mistake was realized. But it was too late. The gift could not be caught, could not be recalled or diverted from its path. The architects and work crews, horrified at the awful power of the thing upon which they labored, had quietly self-terminated, and droves, walking-ons, yielded into radiation zones, neglecting proper, no pressure safety or simple ceasing their nutrient consumption until their metabolic functions stopped. The appalling cost in lives had forced the orches traders to streamline the gift's design and construction. There had been no time for the design or implementation of anything beyond the simple, massive engines and the stabilizing systems. We could only watch in shame and horror as the light of genocide faded into infrared against the distant void. They grew, and they changed. In a handful of lifetimes they abolished war, abandoned their violent tendencies, and turned themselves to the grand purposes of life and art. We watched them remake first themselves, and then their world. Their frail, soft bodies gave way to gleaming metals and plastics. They unified their people through an omnipresent communications grid and produced art of such power and emotion, the likes of which the galaxy has never seen before or again, because, they converted their home world into a paradise by their standards, and many 106s of them poured out into the surrounding system with a rapidity and vigor that we could only envy. Its bodies built to survive every environment, from the tailored surface of their innermost world to the atmosphere of their largest gas giant and the cold void in between. they set out to sculpt their system into something beautiful. At first we thought them simple miners stripping the rocky planets and moons for vital resources, but then we began to see the purpose to their constructions. The artworks carved into every surface and traced across the system in glittering lights and dancing fusion trails. And still our terrible gift approached. They had less than 20 to daily to see it fall, lowing so closely on the tail of its own light. Their planet-side engineers worked frantically to build sufficient transmission infrastructure to upload the countless masses with the necessary neural modification NS, while those above dumped lifetimes of music and literature from their databanks to make room for passengers. Those lacking the required hardware or the time to acquire it consigned themselves to death, lashed out in fear and pain, or simply went about their lives as best they could under the circumstances. The gift arrived suddenly, the light of its impact visible in our skies, shining bright and cruel even to an augmented ocular receptor. We watched and we wept for our victims, dead so many dealers before the light of their doom had even reached us. Many 64 seconds of those who had been directly or even tangentially involved in the creation of the gift seal their spiracles with paste as a final penance for the small roles they had played in this atrocity. The light dimmed, the dust cleared, and our observatories refocused upon the place where their shining blue world had once hung in the void and found only dust and the pale gleam of an orphan moon wrapped in a thin, burning wisp of atmosphere that had once belonged to its parent. Radiation and relativistic shrapnel had wiped out much of the inner system, and tiny-sized chunks of molten rock carried, screaming ghosts outward at interstellar escape velocities, damned to wander the great void for an eternity. The damage was apocalyptic, but not complete. From the shadows of the outer worlds, tiny points of light emerged, thousands of fusion trails of single ships and world ships, and everything in between, many 106s of survivors in flesh and steel and memory banks, ready to rebuild. For a few moments we felt relief, even joy, and we were filled with a hope that their culture and art would survive the terrible blow we had dealt them. Then came the message, tightly focused at our star, transmitted simultaneously by hundreds of their ships. We know you are out there, and we are coming for you. Message. ENDS Story 4, a warning. I'm doing this for you, and for Mike, too. I guess, though I don't think there is much I can do to help him at this point. I suppose I should provide some background information first. I'm a sophomore in a fairly good university in Boston. No, not Mid or Harvard, but still one that's a bit of a chore to get into. Why, freshman year, I had the option to leave Van Honors housing and decided to roll with it. After all, at least the people would be interesting. Whatever arcane algorithm they used to process roommate requests took in my preferences and spat out the name of my future roommate. Mike, just another random honors kid from St. Louis. The two of us got along fine for most of freshman year, my enjoyment of Miley Cyrus notwithstanding, and so we decided to room together sophomore year as well. Now, Mike had always been a pretty obsessive guy. He tended to bounce around in his interests. One week he would devour an entire series of anime only, to later start watching random online episodes of Mystery Science Theater 3000 and then began working his way through the archives of the hottest new webcomic. And, of course, like any real obsessive, he would keep me posted on his latest craze. I humored him. What else are roommates for? One day earlier this week, he started telling me random scary stories, those random things you find on message boards. I think his main source ended up being some site called creepypasta. I never understood why pasta could be creepy, but whatever. I'd hear about a med student eating an arm, or someone being autopsied alive, or some random YouTube video that will drive you insane. We usually had a good laugh about them the third day of this obsession. However, then cheese got weird. He threw a few more stories my way before hitting the sack, but something seemed a little off. His voice had a sharp edge to it. As the hour got later, his banter got more and more inane, as though he were talking just to stave off having to go to sleep. Eventually, I pointedly got into my bed and rolled over, effectively ending any further chance at conversation. I wish I hadn't. I sleep like a log, and that night was no exception. I don't think I even came close to waking. Usually I can't remember any of my dreams, but the nightmare I had that night has been clear in my mind for days now. I dreamt I was trapped in a fog so dense I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. The damp air sent chills down my spine. I could hear muffled screams in the distance. There didn't seem to be any words, just guttural shrieks of pain. Instantly, don't ask me how, I recognized the screams as Mike's. I tried my best to run to him, but my feet just slid through the fog. I couldn't get any real traction on the ground. If there indeed was any ground, the screams got further away and more indistinct, though I could still tell they were Mike's. Eventually they faded to nothing, and I woke up, and every last trace of Mike was gone from the room. Everything, his laptop, his sheets, the official zombie survival guide poster on the wall, the heap of trash he let accumulate on his half of the windowsill, everything. A thick layer of dust coated his entire side of the room. Absolutely nothing on my side of the room had been touched, nor had any of his stuff in the bathroom, the kitchen, or the living room of our suite. Only in the bedroom had anything been taken. I couldn't believe it. I prayed it was a dream. I pinched my elbow until the skin was red, until my fingernails drew blood. When I didn't wake up, then in shock, I felt completely numb, like nothing around me really mattered. I'd left my laptop out in our suite's common room, so I used that to distract myself or to try to. At any rate, when I popped open the laptop, however, a Word document stared at me. Its text was the following: I know this is stupid. I can't help but think how much I'll regret this in the morning. But for some reason I'm genuinely scared, and I feel like this is the only way I can tell someone why. So here goes. Earlier, I was scouring the net for short horror stories, rituals, tales of scary places, and the like. I came across this warning, I guess it was. I won't say what, and I won't say where, for fear of you finding it yourself. Suffice it to say it sent chills down my spine, something not much has managed to do. Still, as has become my habit, I just clicked on the next hyperlink. Going ever farther down the rabbit hole, the warning stayed with me, though, in the back of my head, just nibbling away, waiting until I would focus on something else to rear its ugly head. This was irrational, I knew. My mind was just playing tricks on me. some ancestral fear had been played upon, some age-old nightmare that was just that, a nightmare, no more and no less. But that didn't make the fear go all. Only when I looked at the clock to see how long I had, until you got back, that it dawned on me I had passed the time allotted me by the warning to stop what was coming. Any vagueness is out of concern for you, I promise. And then the real anxiety kicked in. My palms started to sweat, and my eyes refused to stay closed for more than a second at a time. All my hairs stood on end, and I could feel my heart rate start to increase. Instantly, I knew that the warning had been real, and I had failed to heed it. My time was limited. It was about then that you got back from the TV station. I was so glad to see someone else. I can't imagine how I sounded. Finally, someone to fight off the dark with, a companion against the now terrifying night. But clearly you weren't interested. Your yawns were a dead giveaway. You headed to bed, and I, to stave off sleep a little longer, decided to write you this. Do me a favor. If I'm wrong, forge. This ever happened. If I'm right, warn them. So that's what I'm doing. I'm warning you, just be careful. Next time you go on an archive binge at creepypasta, or start checking the horror thread of your favorite discussion board, or even just try Googling creepy stories, if you feel a chill run down your spine at some warning you've never read before, you might want to heed it. If you decide not to, however, if you just click on your merry way, please tell Mike I'm sorry I couldn't get to him in the fog. Story 5. Caught in the headlights. I was driving home from school for Thanksgiving break. It was dark even though it was only 7 p.m. I always hated when it started to get dark so early. I always felt like I was missing out on the day when it would be dark by the time I got out of class. Unfortunately, I wasn't the only one driving home this evening. Apparently, a lot of other students also had this idea, judging from the traffic on the freeway. Bored with the stopping and going of the gridlock, I decide to hop off the highway and take some country roads past some of the heavier holdups. I turned down a road that looks to be running about parallel to the highway, and off I went. It felt nice, being able to just drive without worrying about stopping and going and switching lanes. I threw on the cruise control and just rode the gentle hills up and down through the dark farmlands with nothing but the moon, stars, and my headlights lighting my way. But after about 20 minutes, the farmlands turned to forest and I lost the moon and stars. The darkness made me feel uneasy for some reason. I was worried a deer might suddenly jump out of the woods, or a turn in the road would go unnoticed until it was too late. I hadn't passed another car since I turned down this country road, so I figured it would be okay to turn on my brights. With my right hand on my gear shift, I reach with my left hand to flick the switch for the bright lights. I froze. My blood turned to ice. My stomach dropped to the floor. My body went numb. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. My body was betraying me. I tried to move. I urged myself to move. I pleaded with my body to move, but I just couldn't. I suddenly had an incredible urge to look into my rearview mirror. I didn't know what I expected to see, but I just knew I had to look. I used every ounce of strength and willpower to force my eyes up to the mirror. Inch by agonizingly slow inch, my eyes slid across the interior of my car until finally my eyes came to the mirror. A girl In the back seat of my car sat what appeared to be a young woman in a dress. My brain was numb. I could not comprehend what was happening. She seemed to radiate some sort of pale gray light, but she wasn't illuminating her surroundings. Her wavy hair fell past her shoulders, and her expressionless face was sprinkled with freckles. Her dull eyes stared blankly straight ahead. My mind struggled to make sense of this situation. So many questions whirled in my head that they just became a giant, tangled mess. I sat there, brain spinning, until a question just fell out of my mouth. "Who are you?" I asked in barely a whisper. At the sound of my voice, her eyes crashed into mine. They pierced me. They bore into mine, and I could do nothing but stare back. They were empty. There was no emotion in her eyes, nothing at all. I felt as if a part of me was being sucked into the voids that were her soulless eyes, and the ice that filled my veins felt as if it had turned into a fine powder. Eternity. Ties came and went, or so it felt, before I was able to regain my voice. I managed to get out before my voice was lost again. Her eyes remained locked with mine, and for a moment there was silence. "Do I frighten you?" Her mouth barely moved. Her eyes never did. I only just heard her. I thought maybe my mind was tricking me. It sounded like her words were being caught by wind. My brain was still in a tangle, and I couldn't comprehend what she was asking. I wanted to answer, to tell her yes. She was in fact scaring me to death in hopes that maybe she would stop. But there was a question nagging at the back of my mind that finally made its way through all the clutter. "Are you a ghost?" I whispered. Her eyes continued to burrow into mine, digging deeper and deep into me. My body was going cold, but my mind was beginning to clear. "Does my presence frighten you?" she asked again, her eyes never wavering. I met her gaze and answered, "No." We sat in silence for a moment, my eyes meeting hers and hers piercing mine. The tangle in my brain was beginning to release. My thoughts were becoming more clear. "I am afraid of you, but your presence does not frighten me," I whispered. She cocked her head slightly to the side, but continued staring into me. My voice felt stronger now. "Your presence here is a relief to me. In a way, you have proven to me that there is something after death. I don't know what it is yet, but it's comforting to know that there is something." "Anything?" She continued staring. "Is this how you looked when you die?" I asked her. She nodded, slowly, effortlessly. She barely appeared to be moving. "You were beautiful." Her eyes widened ever so slightly. There was a flash of sadness in them before they were consumed again by that vast emptiness. Her eyes met mine, and mine hers. She lifted her arm and pointed a finger straight ahead. "Watch where you are going." At that moment I regained control of body. I looked where she had been pointing and saw a sharp turn in the road and nothing but forest in front of me. I slammed on the brakes and turned the wheel. My back tires fishtailed from side to side as I tried to turn the wheel. To compensate, my tires came loose of the pavement, and I did a full 360 turn before I came to a screeching stop mere feet away from a tree. I sat there, white-knuckled, clutching the wheel. I was breathing as if I had just run a marathon. I remembered the girl and whipped my head around to look in the back seat, but she was gone. I turned back and slumped into the seat. I must have fallen asleep at the wheel. It was all just a dream. After a few minutes of catching my breath and thanking whoever was looking out. For me, I turned on my car and got back onto the road. As I was driving, with my right hand on my gear shift, I reached with my left hand to flick the switch for the bright lights with a click. The forest was illuminated by my car's lights. A few hundred feet down the road I saw a yellow road sign that read "Caution, High Accident Area," and I chuckled. That sign would have been useful 5 minutes ago, but as I got closer I realized there was more writing on it. On the bottom part of the sign was something handwritten in red paint. "Rip Samantha, Story 6, The Hazards of Dating. Dating sucks as an adult. The only way to meet new people is either on the internet or in a bar, and I'm not comfortable trying to start a relationship with someone I've come across in either of those scenarios at 28 years old. Not being romantically interested in any of my unmarried friends or coworkers, I figured I was just doomed to be single the rest of my life. But then I met her. I was walking home from my favorite local comic book store, nose buried in my newest purchase, when I walked straight into the woman of my dreams. Her piercing blue eyes crinkled a bit to the corners as she laughed at my bumbling apology. She looked down at the ground briefly and tucked a bit of her dark brown hair behind her ear before looking back at me and sticking out her hand. "I'm Miranda," she cooed as I shook her hand. She was beautiful, and I was hooked. Introductions turned into small talk turned into conversation, and before I knew it, my watch informed me that we had been sitting on the grass next to the sidewalk for 2 hours chatting. I regretfully announced that I needed to get home, then nervously asked Miranda if she would like to meet me the next night for dinner. She agreed, and we set the time and place for our date. I was over the moon the rest of the night and most of the next day. My nerves kicked in on the way to the expensive Italian restaurant we decided on. It suddenly occurred to me that we hadn't even exchanged phone numbers. What if she was just being polite and had no intention of coming WH? And if she was in an accident or her car broke down and she couldn't make it? A million scenarios raced through my head as I began to sweat and my heart started to race. My stomach was in knots when I walked through the doors of the restaurant, but the bad feelings fell away as soon as I saw her standing in the corner wearing a purple dress that perfectly complemented her slim figure. The hostess looked at me funny when I asked for a table for two, and my anxiety perked up again. My panic had left me sweaty, and I was suddenly aware that I had run my fingers through my hair a few times while in transit. I must have looked a mess. Despite my nice pants and shirt, I used my hands to ensure my hair was put back into place and wiped my forehead with my sleeve as I followed the hostess and my date to a table in the corner of the eatery. The date went amazingly well. Miranda let me order for both of us, telling me that she trusted my judgment. We chatted and laughed through the meal like we had known each other forever. The world around me could have been in shambles, and I wouldn't have noticed. I loved being with her so much. Of course, the joy of any love was short-lived. Otherwise, I wouldn't be posting this. Here, of all places, we decided to go for a stroll through the nearby park after I paid the bill. I worked up the courage to reach for her hand as we happily walked along the concrete path lit by soft yellow lights, my fingers linked with hers and just as I felt how cold her skin was, I noticed that she had stopped talking and the air around us had grown tense. My first thought was that I fucked up. I looked at her, already asking if she was all right. She'd changed. Her skin had turned a bluish gray, marked with deep purple bruises. Around her throat, the left side of her face was so rotted away that I could see her teeth through her cheek. The bright blue of her eyes was now covered with a milky film, and they stared at me with a hatred so deep that even the bravest soldier would have likely cowered. I choked on a gasp and tried to back away, but she strengthened her grip on my hand so that I could only move as far as our combined arm's length. My fingers throbbed and the muscles in my hand and wrist started burning while I tried to pull free from her grasp. Her fingers were so decomposed that I could see tendon, and bone, but they were strong, inhumanly strong. My yells for help echoed off the surrounding trees. I pulled with all my might, but Miranda wouldn't let go. She just stood there in her dirty, tattered dress, staring at me like I was the worst form of scum. My heart was beating so hard that I could feel it pounding from my chest to the top of my head. Tears streaked down my hot face. I stopped yelling, even if my labored breathing allowed the effort. I knew no one could hear me. I fell to my knees, forcing myself to stare at the ground instead of the rotting woman before me. I begged in between, panting, "Please, please don't kill me." Miranda started laughing then, not the musical laugh that had hypnotized me earlier, but a deep, menacing cackle that made me shiver. And she stopped. She crouched down so that we were face to face. She tilted her head, the bones in her neck cracking and popping with the movement, and grimaced. I said the same thing, you know. Didn't help me one bit. She brought up the hand that wasn't on the verge of breaking mine and stroked my cheek, leaving a sticky trail of rotten blood behind as her skin tore on contact. Once she met the base of my jaw, the tender gesture ended and she wrapped her hand around my throat. She pushed me to my back and brought her other hand to my throat as well as she straddled me. I gasped and fought, alternating between trying to push her off of me and attempting to pull her hands away. The edges of my vision grew hazy, the picture of her ghoulish complexion blurred, and I was sure I was about to die just before I lost consciousness. She lowered her face until it was just inches from mine and screamed. I brought my hands to my ears to try to block out the piercing shriek and shut my eyes tight. After a brief moment, I realized that the pressure around my throat was gone and I could breathe again. I rolled onto my side, coughing and rubbing my throat as Mira's screams faded into echoes. She was gone. I laid on the ground for a few minutes until my breathing and heart rate returned to a semi-normal state. Then I ran to where I had parked my car at the restaurant and drove home. It took a few days for the bruising around my neck to heal, but physically there was no permanent damage done. I counted my blessings and hadn't gone on a date since Story 7. Night hike. When I was in the 6th grade, I went on a school-sponsored camping trip with my classmates. It was kind of like an immersive science lesson. The trip was chaperoned by our science teacher, homeroom teacher, and language arts teacher, and there were 16 of us in my class. It was a really small private school in the city, and they felt like we needed to get out and experience nature firsthand. Their solution was to take us out into central Pennsylvania to a campsite called the sanctuary. It was actually a hawk sanctuary, and it was really beautiful. There were trees and mountains for miles and miles. We went on hikes, studied trees and birds, and learned basic survival camping skills. The best part of the trip was that we all got to sleep over in cabins and make s'mores and wear street clothes. By street clothes, I mean jeans and sweatshirts and baseball caps. We had to wear uniforms to school, and wearing jeans to a school function felt strangely rebellious. We stayed two nights, and I was really scared of the dark. Actually, I still am, and darkness in the wilderness is much different than the dark of the city. I remember having a hard time falling asleep because it was just so dark, and the cabins were more like wooden platforms with an arch roof open on each end. We had mosquito nets and bunk beds, and then just woods all around. I seemed to be the only one who had a problem with it, so I didn't say anything. I forced myself to close my eyes, and I felt somehow a little bit more secure with the net. It really didn't make any sense because it was only protective against tiny insects, that I felt like I had a shield. Somehow I didn't get much sleep the first night, and every time I heard a stick crack outside, I jolted away. The second and final night came, and everyone was excited about the night hike. The night hike was exactly what it sounds like. We went for a walk through the woods on a tiny, winding path, only perceptible to the camp guide. He went first, and then the teacher and students followed in a single, winding line holding hands. We had to be silent so that we could hear all the sounds of the night. Needless to say, I was terrified. It was kind of exciting, but man, I was scared. I was glad that we were able to hold hands, but I'm talking about a pitch black, middle of nowhere, surrounded by 15 other 12-year-olds kind of night hike. It was a disaster waiting to happen. We walked for a while, and a few kids squeaked here and there when strange noises, which were usually birds, erupted from the darkness around us. I was for sure one of the squeakers. We finally made it to a clearing with a rolling field that stretched about a mile away to another line of pine trees. The moonlight illuminated everything. It cast a bone-white shine over the grass, and the ground seemed to shimmer in some places. It was beautiful and strange. I felt like I was in a dream world. Everyone stood in a silent, huddled circle. I remember the guide talking in a whispered voice about the nocturnal animals and the sounds of the owls in the surrounding trees. I looked to my right down the steepest slope of the meadow, and I stared off into the blackness between the trees. On the other side, I felt safe, being with my group, and I was comfortable enough to let my mind wander to darker things. To this day, I don't know why, but I imagined a woman, pale as the moonlight, in a white nightgown, emerging from that dark spot into the clearing. She was old and insane. She was running towards me very fast, and she was screaming. Her screams were silent. She ran towards us, and I could see that her screams had turned to cackling. She was utterly deranged, and coming right towards us. My eyes widened, and I turned away and buried my face into my friend Lisa's back. I started to cry, and she turned to me and shushed me. A teacher came over and pulled me aside and asked if I was all right. A few of my classmates were giggling at my outburst. I looked back at the hillside and saw nothing. I told the teacher I was all right, and the teacher stayed close to me the whole walk back. I didn't sleep at all that night. I knew I had imagined it, but it was so clear and horrifying that I felt it had to mean something, and at night, imagined things seem very real. I kept my tiny flashlight on inside my sleeping bag and prayed for morning to come. We packed up the next morning and I went home and then ever went camping again. I'm 27 years old now, and I still think about that crazy woman in the woods. She's running towards me with fire in her eyes, and her white wrinkled skin shines in the moonlight. I can't get rid of her. Long story made longer. I did some research on the area today, and of course there are tons of ghost stories about the sanctuary and the land around it. Apparently, it has a long history of violence. Originally, it was inhabited by the Lenape Indians, and there are even the remains of a ceremonial ring on one of the mountains there. To make things worse, European settlers tried to inhabit the area, and tensions between them and the Native Americans led to a bloodbath in 1756. I then found a story about Matthias Schambacher and his wife, who owned a cottage in that area in the 1800s and rented rooms to travelers. Rumors state that many travelers that stayed the night there were never seen again, and some that stayed and lived through it reported strange noises in the night and just an overall feeling of unease. There is a report of one man who was brave enough to get close to the cottage to spy on the Schambachers and claimed that he saw Matthias scrubbing blood off of the wall of the barn. Apparently, on his deathbed, Matthias confessed to robbing and killing more than 13 travelers. He also said that he committed the murders not just for the money, but because an evil force that resided on the hillside spoke to him, urging him to kill. Some, if not most of this, is probably just rumor or exaggeration, but I was surprised by how many stories there were about paranormal experiences in that forest. That was just the first story I read. I wonder now if I had imagined the ghostly woman or if I really saw her. Could something like that pop into my young mind? The only thing I'm certain of is that I'm glad I didn't know the history of that place while I was there. If I had, I would. Do you have never walked into that black forest all those years ago?